friends. We're on episode 2 of Thank You, Mr. Falker by Patricia Polacco. Yesterday we read about how Trisha, like Patricia, this is an autobiographical story, had trouble in school. She desperately wanted to learn how to read, and it was really, really hard for her, and math was hard too. So she didn't like school very much, unfortunately, but she loved to draw. And we left the story when we found out that the family is moving from Michigan to California, and that's where we'll pick up. So Trisha's going to be starting at a new school. Here's the picture. But the news at school was the same. When she tried to read, she stumbled over the cat, ran, and she was reading like a baby in 3rd grade. And when her teacher read along with them and called on Trisha for an answer, she gave the wrong answer every time. That can be a hard feeling. "Hey, dummy," a boy called out on the playground. "How come you're so dumb?" Other kids stood near him and they laughed. Trisha could feel the tears burning her eyes. How she longed to go back to her grandparents' farm in Michigan. Here's the next page. Now Trisha wanted to go to school less and less. "I have a sore throat," she'd say to her mother, or "I have a stomach ache." She dreamed more and more and drew more and more, and she hated school. Then, when Trisha started 5th grade, the school was all abuzz. There was a new teacher. He was tall and elegant. Everybody loved his striped coat and slick gray pants. He wore the neatest clothes. All the usual teachers' pets gathered around him, like Stevie Joe and Alice Marie and Davy and Michael Lee. But right from the start, it didn't seem to matter to Mr. Falker which kids were the cutest, or the smartest, or the best at anything. Mr. Falker would stand behind Trisha whenever she was drawing, and he'd whisper, "This is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Do you know how talented you are?" When he said this, even the kids who teased her would turn around in their seats and look at the drawings, but they still laughed whenever she gave a wrong answer. Then one day, she had to stand up and read, which she hated. She was stumbling through pages in Charlotte's Web, and the page was going all fuzzy, and the kids began to laugh out loud. Mr. Falker, in his plaid jacket and his butterfly tie, said, "Stop. Are all of you so perfect that you can look at another person and find fault with her?" Mr. Falker stood up for her, didn't he? That was the last day anyone laughed out loud or made fun of her, all except Eric. He had sat behind Trisha for 2 whole years, but he seemed to almost hate her. Trisha didn't know why. He waited by the door of the classroom for her and pulled her hair. He waited for her on the playground, leaned into her face, and called her Toad. Trisha was afraid to turn any corner for fear that Eric would be there. She felt completely alone. The only time she was really happy was when she was around Mr. Falker. He let her erase the blackboards. Only the best students got to do that. He patted her on the back whenever she got something right, and he looked hard and mean at any kid who teased her. But the nicer Mr. Falker was to Trisha, the worse Eric treated her. He got all the other kids to wait for her on the playground or in the cafeteria and even in the bathroom, and to jump out and call her stupid or ugly, and Trisha began to believe them. She discovered that if she asked to go to the bathroom just before recess, that she could hide under and inside the stairwell during the free time and not have to go outside at all. In that dark space, she felt completely safe. Isn't that sad that in order to feel safe, she had to hide in a dark space? But one day at recess, oh, there she is in her dark space under the stairs. One day at recess, Eric followed her into the secret hiding place. "Have you become a mole?" he laughed, and he pulled her out into the hall and danced around her. "Dumbbell, dumbbell, maggoty old dumbbell." Trisha buried her head in her arms and curled up in a ball. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. It was Mr. Falker. He marched Eric down to the office. When he came back, he found Trisha. "I don't think you'll have to worry about that boy again," he said softly. "What was he teasing you about, little one?" "I don't know," Trisha shrugged. Trisha was sure that Mr. Falker believed that she could read. She had learned to memorize what the other kid next to her was reading, or she would wait for Mr. Falker to help her with a sentence, and then she'd say the same thing that he did. "Good," he would say. Then one day Mr. Falker asked her to stay after school and help wash the blackboards. He put on music and he brought out little sandwiches, and they worked and talked. All at once he said, "Let's play a game. I'll shout out letters and you write them on the board with a wet sponge quickly as you can." "A," he shouted. She wiped a watery A. "8," he shouted. She made a watery 8. 14, 3, D, M, Q, D, M, Q, he shouted out. He shouted out many, many letters and numbers. Then he walked up behind her, and together they looked at the board. It was a watery mess. Trisha knew that none of the letters or numbers looked the way they should. She threw the sponge down and tried to run away. Friends, we're going to stop there. It's hard to stop at this interesting part of the story, but we're going to find out in episode 3 how Mr. Falker is able to help Trisha in her journey to learn how to read. Coming up next.